You see this $90,000 masterpiece. In less than 60 seconds, my smug HOA neighbor turned it into a pile of shattered glass and twisted metal with a sledgehammer. She thought her noise complaint gave her the right to destroy my life, but she made one fatal mistake. She didn't see the hidden 4K cameras recording every felony swing. Today I'm showing you the exact moment she realized she didn't just ruin my car, she ruined her entire life. This isn't just a car story, it's the ultimate karma that left her homeless and broken. Here is how it happened. Most people have a dream. Mine was made of 707 horsepower, a supercharged V8, and a $90,000 price tag. I spent years working double shifts, sacrificing every luxury just to hear that Hellcat roar in my driveway. It was more than a car, it was my trophy for every night I stayed up late and every weekend I worked. But in a quiet suburban neighborhood, success doesn't always bring friends. Sometimes it brings a predator. Enter Karen. Karen didn't just live 2 houses down, she ruled the street with an iron clipboard. She wasn't officially on the HOA board, but she was a self-appointed enforcer who spent her days measuring people's grass and timing how long trash can stay on the curb. To her, my Hellcat wasn't a car. It was an assault on her ears and a criminal magnet. "That car is a public nuisance," she'd scream from her porch every time I left for work. "It's too loud, it's too aggressive, and it's tanking our property values." I tried everything to keep the peace. I checked the HOA bylaws, 0 rules against factory exhausts. I never revved the engine, I never drove late at night. I was a ghost in my own neighborhood. But Karen didn't want peace, she wanted a fight. She started leaving fake citations under my windshield, claiming I owed the HOA hundreds of dollars in noise fines. When I ignored them, her obsession turned into a full-blown stalking campaign. My security cameras caught her at all hours, taking photos of my tires, peering through my windows, and even leaving notes about the dangers of noise pollution. She'd stand at the edge of my property, arms crossed, glaring like I was a villain in a movie. I thought she was just a bitter, lonely woman with too much time on her hands. I was wrong. Karen was actually dangerous. The tension reached a breaking point on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my home office, finishing a call, when the silence was shattered by a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a heavy, metallic crunch. Then the sound of glass exploding like a gunshot. I sprinted to the window, and my heart literally stopped. There was Karen. She wasn't carrying a clipboard today. She was swinging a 10-pound industrial sledgehammer with both hands, slamming it into the hood of my $90,000 Dream. Crunch. The carbon fiber buckled. She moved to the driver's side door and swung again, caving in the metal like it was paper. The car alarm started screaming, a mechanical cry for help that echoed through the entire neighborhood. I burst through my front door, my voice cracking as I screamed for her to stop. But she didn't look scared. She turned toward me, the hammer resting on her shoulder with a look of pure, manic triumph. "I told you I'd quiet it down," she panted, a smug smile stretching across her face. "Now the problem is solved." She took one last swing, shattering the passenger window into a million glittering diamonds on the pavement. She thought she had won. She thought she'd just cleaned up the neighborhood. What she didn't realize was that my house was equipped with a 4K, 360-degree surveillance system that had captured every single felony strike in high definition. She had no idea that while she was smiling at the damage, she was also looking at the end of her life as she knew it. The police were already on their way, and I wasn't just filing a report. I was preparing to take everything she ever owned. The silence that followed the last swing of the sledgehammer was deafening. My $90,000 Hellcat was bleeding oil and coolant onto the driveway, its once perfect frame now a twisted heap of metal and shattered glass. Karen stood there, breathing heavily, leaning on her weapon like a victorious warrior. She actually looked proud. She thought she had just performed a community service. "You should be thanking me," she panted, wiping sweat from her forehead. "I just restored the peace that you stole from us." I didn't say a word. I didn't scream, and I didn't move toward her. I just held up my phone. I had been recording her on my handheld device since the moment I stepped onto the porch, But more importantly, I pointed toward the 3 discrete 4K cameras mounted on my roof and garage. Her smug smile didn't fade. It twisted into a look of pure, unadulterated arrogance. "Record all you want," she spat. "The HOA bylaws give me the right to abate a nuisance." "Your car was a nuisance. I just abated it. Any judge will see I was acting in self-defense against noise pollution." It was at that moment I realized Karen wasn't just mean. She was living in a completely different reality. She truly believed that being an unofficial HOA enforcer gave her the legal authority to commit a high-value felony. She didn't realize that abating a nuisance usually involves a court order and a professional crew, not a crazy lady with a sledgehammer at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. Within 6 minutes, the distant wail of sirens began to grow louder. 2 patrol cars swung into our cul-de-sac, their blue and red lights reflecting off the broken glass scattered across my driveway. Karen didn't run. In fact, she smoothed down her floral dress and walked toward the lead officer with a welcoming wave, as if she were the one who had called them. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she chirped, her voice suddenly shifting into a high-pitched, helpful tone. "I've finally taken care of the noise complaint I've been telling the station about. I had to take matters into my own hands, but the neighborhood is safe now." The officer, a veteran sergeant named Miller, looked at the decimated Hellcat, then at the sledgehammer lying at Karen's feet, and then back at Karen. He looked like he had seen a lot of things in his career, but a suburban woman admitting to a $90,000 act of vandalism with a smile was a first. "Ma'am," Sergeant Miller said, his hand hovering near his belt, "did you do this?" "Yes, I told you it's a public nuisance," she replied, her voice filled with self-righteousness. "I followed the HOA guidelines for removal of unauthorized property. I'm practically doing your job for you." I finally stepped forward, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Officer, that's my car. I have 4K footage of her attacking it unprovoked while it was legally parked in my private driveway. She's been stalking me for months." Karen let out a theatrical gasp. "Stalking? I was monitoring. There's a difference." Sergeant Miller didn't need to hear any more. He looked at his partner and gave a small nod. Before Karen could finish her sentence about community standards, the partner grabbed her arm and spun her around. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the most satisfying thing I had ever heard. It was a sharp, metallic snap that signaled the beginning of the end for her. "Wait, what are you doing?" Karen shrieked, her face turning a deep, angry purple. "I'm the victim here. He's the one with the loud engine. You're arresting the wrong person. Do you know who I am?" "I know exactly who you are, ma'am," Miller replied coldly. "You're someone who just committed a first-degree felony. You have the right to remain silent." As they led her toward the back of the patrol car, the neighbors started coming out of their houses. People she had bullied for years, the ones whose grass she had measured and whose kids she had yelled at, were standing on their porches, phones out, recording her walk of shame. But the real clipping point happened right as they were about to shut the door. Karen turned to me, her eyes bulging with madness, and screamed, "The HOA will back me up. You'll be the one paying for my legal fees when they see I was protecting the community." She still thought she was the hero. She had no idea that the HOA president was currently on his way to my house, not to support her, but to hand me a signed affidavit stating that Karen had no authority and was, in fact, already under investigation for harassing other residents. As the police car pulled away, I looked at my ruined Dreamcar. The repair bill was going to be astronomical, but as I looked at the sledgehammer still lying on the ground, I realized something. Karen hadn't just smashed my car. She had opened the door for me to legally dismantle her entire existence, and I was going to enjoy every second of it. As the red and blue lights of the police cruiser faded into the distance, a heavy silence settled over my driveway. My $90,000 Hellcat sat there, looking like it had been through a war zone. But while my heart was breaking for the car, my brain was already shifting into war mode. I knew that a simple police report wouldn't be enough to truly ruin a woman like Karen. I needed to dig deeper. I called my brother, who happens to be a high-end paralegal, and sent him the 4K footage. His response was immediate. She didn't just commit vandalism, she committed a felony with a deadly weapon in some jurisdictions. But wait, I recognize that name. That's when the first clipping point hit. My brother started digging into the local court records and HOA archives. It turns out this wasn't Karen's first crusade. 5 years ago, in a different county, she had been sued for allegedly poisoning a neighbor's prize-winning rose bushes because they were 2 inches over the fence line. She had settled out of court, moved here, and restarted her reign of terror. But there was a bigger secret hiding in the HOA's own financial mess. While Karen was out enforcing rules and smashing cars, she had been quietly bullying the older members of the board to look the other way while she borrowed community funds for her own home improvements. I spent the next 6 hours printing every threat she'd ever emailed me, every fake citation she'd left on my windshield, and every frame of that 4K footage where she was smiling while swinging the hammer. I wasn't just going for the repair costs of the car. I was going for intentional infliction of emotional distress and harassment. The next morning, I met with a top-tier litigator. He looked at the photos of the destroyed Hellcat and then at the video of Karen's smug face. He leaned back in his chair and smiled, the kind of smile a shark gives before it eats. "She thinks she's protected by the HOA bylaws," my lawyer said, tossing a folder onto the desk. "But she's about to find out that the law doesn't care about her noise complaints when she's standing over a $90,000 pile of scrap metal. We're not just suing for the car, we're suing for the maximum, $500,000 in damages and legal fees." But the real bomb was dropped later that afternoon. I went to the HOA board meeting, clutching my laptop. The room was packed with neighbors who were tired of being bullied. I stood up and played the video, not the one of her hitting the car, but a different one. My hidden cameras had captured Karen 2 nights before the attack. She wasn't measuring grass. She was in the community's shared tool shed, stealing the very sledgehammer she used on my car, a hammer that was paid for by our collective HOA dues. The room erupted. The HOA president, who Karen thought was her ally, turned pale. He realized that if the community found out he let her patrol the neighborhood with stolen tools, he'd be next on the chopping block. He handed me a signed document on the spot. The HOA was officially disavowing Karen and banning her from all common areas effective immediately. I went home and saw a "for sale" sign being hammered into Karen's front lawn by her husband, who looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole and die. He saw me and tried to apologize, but I just looked at the ruins of my Hellcat and kept walking. Karen was out on bail, but she wasn't coming home to a victory. She was coming home to a stack of legal papers that would ensure she'd never be able to afford a sledgehammer, let alone a house, ever again. But just when I thought I had her cornered, I got a frantic call from a neighbor. "You need to check your backyard. Karen isn't done. She's back and she's not alone." I thought the handcuffs were the end of it. I thought seeing Karen hauled away in a patrol car would be enough to make her realize she had lost. But as the neighbor's frantic call echoed in my ear, I realized I had underestimated the level of delusion I was dealing with. Karen didn't see herself as a criminal. She saw herself as a martyr for the sanctity of the neighborhood. I dropped my phone and sprinted to my backyard. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I hadn't even checked the backyard cameras yet, thinking she was still in a holding cell. But money speaks, and apparently Karen had enough for a quick bail. As I rounded the corner of my house, I saw them. It wasn't just Karen. She had managed to convince her 2 disciples, 2 other bitter HOA-obsessed neighbors who had been following her lead for years, to help her finish the job. They weren't near my car this time. They were in my backyard, standing near my expensive outdoor kitchen and the power lines leading to my garage. Karen was holding a can of spray paint in one hand and a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters in the other. She looked completely unhinged, hair disheveled, eyes wild, and still wearing the same floral dress, now stained with the grease from my Hellcat's engine. "If I can't live in a quiet neighborhood, you won't live here at all," she shrieked the moment she saw me. She began spraying public nuisance in bright neon orange across my sliding glass doors. Her friends were busy trying to cut the main power line to my workshop, thinking they were disabling my security system. Little did they know, my system was hardwired and had a 24-hour battery backup. I wasn't just watching them. I was broadcasting them live to the local police dispatcher. "Karen, stop!" I yelled, keeping my distance. "The police are already on their way. You're turning a vandalism charge into an aggravated stalking and home invasion felony." "I don't care," she screamed, swinging the bolt cutters toward me. "The HOA is mine. This neighborhood is mine. You and your loud-mouthed toy are an infection, and I am the cure." It was like watching a villain's final breakdown in a movie. She started smashing my patio furniture, throwing chairs into the pool, and screaming at the top of her lungs about property values and decency. But then, she made the biggest mistake of the night. In her blind rage, she grabbed a heavy stone garden gnome from my porch and threw it, not at the car and not at the house, but directly at me. I ducked, and the stone smashed into the brick wall behind me. That was the clipping point. This wasn't just property damage anymore. This was assault with a deadly weapon. Just as she picked up a second heavy object, the sound of tires screeching filled the air. This time, it wasn't just 2 patrol cars. It was 4. And they didn't come with sirens. They came with searchlights that turned my backyard into high noon daylight. "Police, drop the weapon. Get on the ground now." Karen froze. Her 2 friends immediately dropped the bolt cutters and hit the grass, sobbing and begging for mercy. But Karen, she stood there, chest heaving, clutching a piece of broken patio stone. She actually raised it toward the officers. The sound of the taser deploying was a sharp pop, followed by the crackle of electricity. Karen let out a strangled yelp and crumpled to the ground like a sack of potatoes. The smug queen of the HOA was face down in the mud, twitching while the officers moved in to zip-tie her hands. Sergeant Miller walked up to me, shaking his head. "I told her at the station that if she went near your property, her bail would be revoked. I guess she didn't believe me." "Is she going away this time?" I asked, my voice shaking with adrenaline. Miller looked at the neon orange paint on my house, the smashed furniture, and the recorded video on my tablet. "Between the Hellcat, the home invasion, and now assaulting an officer, she's not seeing the outside of a cell for a long, long time. And your friends over there, they're going down as accomplices." As they dragged a sobbing Karen toward the car for the second time in 24 hours, I looked at my lawyer who had just pulled up. He was already typing on his laptop. "The $500,000 lawsuit just became a $1 million claim," he said without looking up. "We're going for her house, her retirement, and every cent she's ever saved. By the time I'm done with her, she won't be able to afford a cardboard box, let alone a sledgehammer." But as I watched her house across the street, I noticed something. The lights were on, and there was a moving truck arriving in the middle of the night. Karen's husband wasn't waiting for the trial. He was fleeing, and he was carrying something that looked like a large, locked metal box. As the police sirens faded for the second time that night, the neighborhood felt eerily still. Karen was finally gone, likely for good this time, but the sight of her husband, David, loading a heavy metal box into a moving truck at 3 a.m. sent a chill down my spine. He wasn't acting like a man whose wife was in jail. He was acting like a man who was running for his life. I didn't let him see me. I stayed in the shadows of my porch, watching through my high-powered binoculars. David was sweating, his hands shaking as he struggled with the weight of that box. It looked like an old-fashioned fireproof safe. Why was he moving it now? Why not wait until morning? I knew if that box left the neighborhood, my chances of uncovering the real reason Karen felt so untouchable would vanish. I grabbed my phone and called Sergeant Miller. He hadn't even reached the station yet. "Sergeant, you need to pull over the white moving truck leaving house 402, I whispered. "I have reason to believe they're removing evidence related to the HOA's missing funds." It was a gamble, but it worked. 10 minutes later, I saw the blue lights flashing at the entrance of our community. I followed at a distance. When I arrived, David was standing on the side of the road, his face pale as a ghost. The police had the truck open, and there sat the metal box. Because David was the husband of a woman who just committed multiple felonies on my property, and because I had already filed a preliminary injunction, the police had enough probable cause to secure the assets until a warrant could be issued. But David didn't even fight it. He just sat on the curb and put his head in his hands. "I told her to stop," David muttered, loud enough for me to hear. "I told her that car was going to be our downfall. She got greedy. She thought she was smarter than everyone." The clipping point happened the next morning when my lawyer and the independent auditor we hired finally got a look inside that box. It wasn't just cash. It was a second set of shadow ledgers for the HOA. It turned out Karen wasn't just a busybody. She had been the de facto treasurer for years because she had dirt on the actual board members. She had been skimming nearly 20% of our annual dues to pay for her lifestyle, her vacations, her designer clothes, and even the very legal fees she used to bully other neighbors. But the biggest shock, the Sledgehammer attack on my Hellcat, wasn't just about noise. My car was equipped with a high-end dashcam that uploaded footage to the cloud automatically. 2 days before she smashed my car, my dashcam had accidentally recorded Karen and the HOA president in a heated argument in front of my house. They were discussing a $50,000 gap in the landscaping fund. Karen knew my car was parked there. She knew the camera was active. She didn't smash the car because of the exhaust. She smashed it to destroy the physical camera and the storage card inside, not realizing that modern tech sends everything to a secure server instantly. She wasn't just a Karen. She was a criminal covering her tracks. When the HOA president found out the ledgers had been seized, he resigned immediately and fled the state. The entire board collapsed in a single afternoon. The petty neighborhood drama had officially turned into a multi-million-dollar embezzlement case. I sat in my living room, looking at the 4K footage of that argument on my laptop. I realized then that I wasn't just going to get my car fixed. I was going to be the one to decide who stayed in this neighborhood and who went to federal prison. I received a text from my lawyer. "The audit is complete. Karen didn't just steal from the HOA. She took out a second mortgage on her house using forged board signatures. She doesn't own that house anymore. The bank is foreclosing. And since you're the primary creditor in the lawsuit, guess who gets first dibs on the property?" A slow smile spread across my face. The ultimate revenge wasn't just seeing her in a cell. It was the fact that when Karen finally got out of jail, she would have to walk past her old house and see my Hellcat, fully restored, parked in her former driveway. But then my phone buzzed again. It was an anonymous message from a burner number. "You think you've won? Check your garage. We left you a gift." The anonymous text felt like a cold blade against my neck. "Check your garage. We left you a gift." I stood frozen in my living room, the glow of the laptop screen reflecting off my face. My mind raced. Was it a bomb, another sledgehammer, or something much more twisted? I didn't rush out. I did what any smart homeowner in 2026 would do. I pulled up the internal garage cameras on my phone. The feed was flickering. Someone had sprayed something on the lenses, but I could still see a dark, liquid pool spreading from under the garage door. My heart sank. If they had dumped gasoline, one spark would take down my entire house. I called the police again, but this time I grabbed my own protection, a high-powered tactical flashlight and my heavy-duty garden shears. I approached the side door of the garage, every nerve in my body screaming danger. When I cracked the door open, the smell hit me. It wasn't gasoline. It was the thick, metallic scent of industrial-grade paint, stripper, and bleach. They hadn't just attacked the Hellcat again. They had gone for the soul of my workshop. Thousands of dollars in professional tools, spare parts, and my custom interior leather seats were doused in corrosive chemicals. But in the center of the mess sat the gift. It was a small, battery-operated speaker looped on a recording. It was Karen's voice, but it wasn't screaming. It was a calm, chilling whisper. "You think you ruined my life? You just freed me from the rules. Now there are no bylaws to stop me." The clipping point hit when I looked up at the rafters. They hadn't just destroyed property, they had rigged a trap. A heavy bucket of nails and glass was perched precariously over the main entrance, wired to the garage door opener. If I had walked in through the front, I would have been hospitalized, or worse. This wasn't a Karen anymore. This was a domestic terrorist. I stepped back, my hands trembling as I realized that Karen's disciples, the two neighbors who were supposed to be in custody, had been bailated out almost instantly. Someone was funding them. Someone with a lot of money and a huge stake in keeping the HOA's secrets buried. I went back to the shadow ledgers I had seized from David's truck. I started cross-referencing names. That's when I found it. The HOA wasn't just a neighborhood group. It was a front for a local real estate developer who had been using Karen to harass homeowners into selling their properties at a loss so he could build a massive commercial complex. Karen wasn't the boss. She was the enforcer for a much bigger fish. And that fish had just realized I had the evidence to send him to prison for life. I sat on my porch, watching the shadows in the street. I realized that my $90,000 car was just a pawn in a much bigger game of greed and corruption. But they made one mistake. They targeted a guy who had nothing left to lose and a 4K cloud backup of every single crime they'd committed. The police arrived and cleared the trap, but the lead detective looked worried. "This is getting out of hand," he said. "We can't keep a patrol car here 24/7. You need to go to a hotel." "No," I replied, looking at the for sale sign on Karen's lawn. "I'm not leaving. In fact, I'm moving forward. My lawyer just finished the paperwork. I'm not just suing Karen. I'm filing a racketeering RICO lawsuit against the entire developer group." As the detective left, I saw a black SUV with tinted windows slow down in front of my house. The driver didn't look at me, but the message was clear. "We are watching." I smiled and held up the shadow ledger for them to see. I knew that by morning the developer would be frantic, but I had one more gift for them. I had already sent a copy of the files to the local news station, and the headline was set to drop at 6 a.m. But then I heard a sound from inside Karen's empty house. A floorboard creaked. Someone was inside, and it wasn't the movers. The creak of the floorboard from inside Karen's empty house chilled me to the bone. According to the police, she was supposed to be behind bars, her bail revoked after the backyard attack. But as I watched a flickering light move past her upstairs window, I realized that in this town, money and corruption could buy you a backdoor out of any cell. I didn't call the police this time, not yet. I knew they were 10 minutes away, and 10 minutes was enough time for Karen to finish whatever sick plan she had left. I grabbed my tactical flashlight and crossed the street. My heart was a drum beating against my chest as I stepped onto her porch. The front door was slightly ajar, the wood splintered around the lock. I stepped inside. The house smelled like stale cigarettes and desperation. "Karen," I called out, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. "It's over. The developer, the ledgers, the embezzlement, it's all out. There's nowhere left for you to hide." A laugh echoed from the top of the stairs, a dry, raspy sound that didn't sound human. "Hide? I'm not hiding, you arrogant little brat," her voice hissed from the shadows. "I'm protecting what's mine." I shone my light up the staircase, and there she was. She looked like a ghost of the woman who had smashed my car. Her floral dress was torn, her eyes were sunken, and in her hand she wasn't holding a sledgehammer. She was holding a 5-gallon jerry can of gasoline and a flare. The clipping point hit me like a physical blow. She wasn't just trying to ruin me anymore. She was going to burn the entire evidence trail down, even if she was inside the house when it happened. "If I can't have this neighborhood, nobody can," she screamed, her voice cracking. She began pouring the liquid onto the expensive hardwood floors, the scent of fuel instantly filling the air. "You and your $90,000 toy. You think you're so much better than us. You think rules don't apply to you because you have money." "Karen, listen to me," I shouted, moving slowly toward the stairs. The developer used you. They were going to dump you the moment the commercial project was approved. You're destroying yourself for people who don't even know your name." "Liar," she shrieked, striking the flare. The bright red glow illuminated her face, making her look like a demon. "They promised me I'd be the head of the new association. They promised me power." She went to toss the flare into the pool of gasoline, but she tripped. In her frantic state, her foot caught on a loose rug, one of the very rugs she'd probably bought with stolen HOA funds. The flare flew out of her hand, but instead of hitting the gas, it landed in a heavy pile of curtains. The fire took hold instantly. Within seconds, a wall of flame separated us. "Karen, get out of there!" I yelled, shielding my face from the heat. But she didn't move. She sat on the floor, watching the flames lick the ceiling, a bizarre, peaceful smile on her face. She had finally achieved the perfect silence she had been obsessed with. I didn't think. I lunged through the edge of the flames, grabbing her by the arms and dragging her down the stairs. She fought me, scratching and screaming that I was trespassing. But I didn't stop until we burst through the front door and onto the lawn. Seconds later, the upstairs windows of the Karen house shattered from the heat. The neighborhood was bathed in an orange glow as the fire department's sirens finally filled the air. As the paramedics strapped a struggling, hysterical Karen onto a gurney, the black SUV I'd seen earlier sped away into the night. They knew the game was up. The fire didn't destroy the evidence, because I had already moved the HOA Ledgers to a secure bank vault hours ago. I stood in the middle of the street, watching the house burn. My neighbor, the one Karen had bullied for years, walked up and handed me a bottle of water. "Is it finally over?" she asked. I looked at the charred remains of the house, then across the street at my workshop where my Hellcat sat, waiting for its restoration. For her, yes, but for the people who put that hammer in her hand, we're just getting started. But then, as the fire chief walked over to me, his expression wasn't one of relief. He held up a small, charred device he'd found near the gas can. "You might want to see this. It's a GPS tracker, and it wasn't registered to the woman. It was registered to a local police precinct." The discovery of the police-registered GPS tracker changed everything. This wasn't just a neighbor war anymore. It was a full-blown conspiracy. The developer hadn't just used Karen. They had bought off a few high-ranking officials to ensure their commercial project went through without a hitch. But they made one fatal mistake. They tried to break a man who kept his receipts in the cloud. With the HOA Ledgers safely in the hands of the state attorney and the FBI, the house of cards began to tumble. The news headline I'd set up didn't just drop, it exploded. By noon the next day, the local police chief was placed on administrative leave, and the real estate developers' offices were being raided by federal agents. But for me, the real justice was personal. 6 months later, the court proceedings finally reached their climax. Karen, dressed in a plain orange jumpsuit and looking 30 years older, stood before the judge. She tried one last time to play the victim, claiming mental distress caused by my loud exhaust. The judge didn't even look up from his papers. "Ma'am," the judge said, his voice echoing through the silent courtroom, "you committed arson, felony vandalism, home invasion, and participated in a racketeering scheme. Your obsession with quiet has earned you exactly what you asked for, 15 years in a very quiet prison cell." As they led her away, Karen's eyes met mine. There was no smugness left. No queen of the HOA attitude. Just the realization that she had lost everything, her house, her reputation, and her freedom, all because she couldn't stand the sight of someone else's success. But the final payback was yet to come. Because Karen had forged board signatures and embezzled funds, her house was seized as part of the RICO asset forfeiture. And because I was the lead plaintiff in the civil lawsuit for the destruction of my Hellcat and the home invasion, I was awarded the title to her property as part of the multi-million-dollar settlement. I didn't keep the house. I sold it to a local nonprofit that builds loud, vibrant community centers for underprivileged kids. I knew the irony would haunt Karen every single day she spent behind bars. The day the restoration of my Hellcat was finally complete, I didn't just drive it home. I drove it to the state penitentiary where Karen was being held. I pulled up to the visitor's gate, perfectly legal, perfectly within the noise limits, and let the engine idle. The supercharger whine was like music, a 707 horsepower symphony of victory. I looked at the prison walls, knowing she was somewhere inside, and I smiled. I hadn't just fixed my car, I had cleaned up my entire city. The developer was bankrupt and facing 20 years. The corrupt officials were in orange jumpsuits. And the HOA, it was restructured with new rules that prioritized transparency over tyranny. I shifted the Hellcat into gear and drove away, the roar of the V8 echoing off the concrete walls. I had followed the rules, I had stood my ground, and I had turned a $90,000 nightmare into the most satisfying revenge story ever told. Karen wanted silence. Now she has 15 years of it. And me, I've never heard anything as beautiful as the sound of justice at 6,000 RPM. Do you think 15 years was enough, or should Karen have gotten more? Let me know in the comments.